Okay, Arizona Cardinals draft review. I definitely wanted to make sure I got them, done before too long. I mean, I'm doing every team, but want to make sure I got to them eventually because they were a team that had a really interesting draft. And I think their second round pick is the one that a lot of people are going to talk about as a slam dunk pick, perhaps. But some other interesting picks here in the mix, and a draft I think is very fascinating. So let's talk about it. First, I have to explain what the chart next to me is. The first number you're going to see is where the player was selected, then the player's name, the position that they play, and finally where they were projected to go on the consensus big board. Let's start off with Walter Nolan, just a player who I think should be really good. And for the Cardinals, who definitely could use to bolster the defense, could use to bolster the defensive line a little bit. They selected Darius Robinson not too long ago. And hey, listen, if he takes the next step this year, because he was selected in last year's draft, if he takes the next step this year, cool, awesome. But they've added Calais Campbell, they've added Dalvin Tomlinson, and they've added Walter Nolan now. They're not relying on that to happen. So I think Walter Nolan could be a really good interior defensive lineman for them. They then, with their next pick, drafted Will Johnson, who is a player who's actually higher on the consensus big board than Walter Nolan was. He was 13th on the consensus big board. Why? What happened here? Why did he fall? Well, the rumor is that the injury that he's had some injury history, and people have more or less said that basically maybe it was worse than they anticipated, or there's just some concerns there because of that he falls. I also think there's some scheme stuff. I think certain teams, he is kind of a bit of a corner that would fit a specific scheme, but the Cardinals run that scheme, so I think they're okay there. They also decided to select edge rusher Jordan Burch, who I say edge rusher, the guy's 295 pounds, 6'6", so that's a lot bigger than your typical edge rusher. I'm assuming he's going to be an interior guy, but was actually an effective enough pass rusher as an edge at Oregon. So he's not just one of those guys who it's like is a complete projection, but definitely really good physical traits while still being, while big guy, moves very well for his size and everything. So there's a bit of projection, and that's ultimately why he falls a little bit, why he's picked 78 instead of, a first rounder. But you could end up with a first round talent if everything works perfectly. And if it does, and Will Johnson works and Walter Nolan works, this could be a massive improvement to a defense. They then went with a couple of Ohio State guys. They're not done with defense just yet, getting Cody Simon and Denzel Burke. And I can kind of talk about them together because, Cody Simon was selected a little bit before he was projected to go. Burke was selected pretty significantly after he was projected to go. Essentially, they're both guys who were like pretty solid players, but just don't necessarily have the physical traits that you might look for, and because of that, they fall. So for Cody Simon, again, the linebacking room for the Cardinals is a little bit weak, so to get a guy who could at least be solid feels like that's pretty good at pick 115. For Burke, again, we'll see. Corners do need to be really physically gifted to cover the great wide receivers at the NFL level. That is just a thing that exists, so we'll see how well that works out in that one. And also, it should be mentioned, I think he had a better year in 2023 than 2024, but for corners, that doesn't really bother me too much because they tend to be pretty up and down. So, yeah, ultimately, again, just getting some good players here. There's a world where you have 5 contributors defensively that you have just drafted. And if you can do that, I mean, when the Chiefs won their back-to-back Super Bowls and made it to 3 straight, that was a big part because of how they drafted. They had the one draft where they got like 7 players who were just solid players, even if none of them were superstars, but also Nolan and Johnson kind of have that high-end potential as well, which is what's really exciting if you're a Cardinals fan, and part of why I like this draft so much. Later on in the draft, we're now in the 200s. They decided to select an offensive lineman, Hayden Connor. Usually these guys are just depth pieces. I will say that, for Texas, who played against some good competition, he did have some pretty solid analytics, although I will say he also had some games that did not go particularly well. Is mostly a solid pass protecting guard, which what do you do with that exactly? I don't know, but hopefully you can coach him up. He's 6'5", 230. He has the build to make it work. So if you can coach him up a bit, there definitely is potential for him to at least be a player in the NFL for a while. So you have that. And then finally, Katon Crawford. I'm not sure exactly how you say that first name, but Crawford is a player who has really only played 1 year. He played a year in Nevada, was pretty good there, though, and he has really good athleticism. A smaller guy, 5'11", 200 pounds, but you have to wonder how much of this selection is, okay, like, are they just going after a special teams guy, which, again, athletic defensive back with pick 225, very likely that's what's happening here, but ultimately I do think there is maybe some potential for him to to get something else and maybe be a starter at some point, right? So I do find him to be somewhat interesting. But yeah, as a whole, for this Arizona Cardinals draft, I do think this is a really strong draft. Again, we'll see how the Will Johnson injury thing goes, but I feel like a lot of times these things end up being okay, right? There are times when it very much goes wrong, and that is the concern of, did you just burn a pick on fire if there is some injury stuff? But he claims he's healthy. He says he's fine. So, again, could a new injury pop up? Well, we'll see, but I wouldn't be overly concerned, I think, if I'm a Cardinals fan. I would be excited because I think there's a lot of potential for some good players and for a team that I think that, the offense can be great, right? This Kyler Murray, when he's on, can be fantastic and can win you some games. Like that Jets game, it was just like, it was over. They were winning immediately because of how good the offense was. But the defense can be a bit hit or miss. It played, I think, solid last year, but to get some players to try and get it better than solid and maybe become a really complete team, Cardinals continuing to rebuild and continuing to be better, and we'll see what they continue to do in the future. But yeah, those are kind of my thoughts on the Cardinals and what they did with this draft and why I liked it so much. One of my favorite drafts, I think. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from y'all. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.